Hello, I'm Foojan Zeine, and welcome to the Inner Voice Show, where we explore what matters to you the most from a psychological perspective. Today, Bill O'Hanlon, psychotherapist, coach, founder of Possibility Theory and Therapy, and developer of solution-focused therapy, is here with us. In 1990, he appeared on Oprah with his book, Do One Thing Different, 10 Simple Ways to Change Your Life. He has also appeared in Today's Show and Canada AM. His work has been featured in many magazines, the Oprah's magazine, Home Journal, New Women, Newsweek, Self, and Women Health and Psychotherapy Network. And since then, he has authored and co-authored 35 books. Welcome, Bill, and thank you for joining me. It's a joy to have you.
Thank you for having me.
So today, we're going to talk about post-traumatic stress and actually success. That means thriving and succeeding after you've really gone through a trauma. I know that you have had a book which is called Thriving Through Crisis, and you went through in what usually people go through when they go through trauma, and then your suggestions on how to be with trauma in any other way. So tell me.
Yes, well, the reason I wrote that book was I was upset about something I saw on television. I saw on the anniversary of the 9/11 attacks here in the U.S., I saw some psychologist or mental health expert on CNN, the news program, and they were asked, it's been 5 years since this 9/11 attack, what would you say to the victims? And the person says, they'll never get over it. And that really upset me, this idea that they'll never get over it. I mean, number one, you and I are both therapists, and we know people do get over things. People do move on. But the other thing is the research doesn't even support that. Most people who go through a traumatic event don't develop post-traumatic stress. It happens. Obviously, people do develop it, but the vast majority of people are more resilient. The second thing is some people who go through trauma have a mixture of good things and bad things, and then some people who go through trauma, it changes their life for the better. So I got upset with this discouraging idea, you'll never get over it, there's only negative effects.
Let's explain what trauma actually is, because as we're talking about it, I want the audience to have an idea about what trauma is, and then what we've usually utilized as a diagnosis in the psychotherapy world is that post-traumatic stress means that you're going most of the day, you're having flashback, your whole body, your whole system is consistently reacting to the same trauma, you have visions of it, it's coming in your sleep, you're depressed, you have high levels of anxiety, and what you're saying is this is not true that this level remains for a lifetime. Obviously it changes, but the way everybody portrays it is that. But when you talk about trauma, what do you mean by trauma?
Well, I think there's two things. One is that clinical definition, and if you look in our manual that we have to use to get insurance reimbursement and to diagnose people, it's one thing, which is you have an overwhelming experience, you see somebody die, or you have a fear that you might die, or that the other person or the other people you're looking at might die. So it really has to be a life-threatening situation to meet that diagnostic criteria, and then, as you said, you're haunted by it afterwards. But I think that in everyday life, people know that not every tragedy or trauma that they go through, every difficulty that they go through, it meets that criteria if you think you're going to die. But I think it does meet that criteria. Some of the things we go through, we're overwhelmed, and our usual coping mechanisms don't work. And then somehow we're affected by it, haunted, I think, by it later. And that's what people typically call post-traumatic stress. Like you say, I have flashbacks of something, a smell, a taste, a vision that I had, a sound that I heard, or the feelings that I had, or my body or some other part of my life starts to get kind of frozen. I relate to people in this fearful way. I relate to myself in this fearful way. We get frozen, there's a U2 song, the Irish pop singers, the rock singers, and they say, stuck in a moment. We sort of get stuck in a moment in trauma. And Sometimes people get stuck for a little while, and then they unfreeze, they move on. Sometimes they get stuck for a very long time, and that's when it's appropriate to call a therapist and get some help.
And Bill, sometimes we have actual traumas that we face death, and we get traumatized by them, such as war, something like 9/11 when you talked about it, or accidents. People get into car accidents, plane accidents, any type of accidents, which they actually fear that they're going to die, or other traumas. But there are also some perceived traumas, such as, because we work a lot with people's childhood, and you sense that maybe the mother or the father or someone, a teacher, said something particular to them, and to them it became traumatic. Although in this context, they necessarily did not face death or think that they're going to die. However, at that moment, something either broke in them or their ego or something happened internally, which they also got stuck and frozen, where we see, sometimes someone is 35, 40, 50 years old, and a part of them is still stuck in that moment where they gave some meaning. So I'm positive that as you're talking about trauma, are you talking about both real and perceived, or
yes.
is it? Okay, great.
Yes, I think so. And you said in their 30s or 40s. I've seen people in their 80s who still remember something that happened when they were 7 years old that affected their whole lives. They kind of lived their whole lives out of that traumatic experience. They were shamed. They were traumatized in some way. They were put down. They were fearful. They developed a belief about themselves or about the world. You can't trust anyone, or you're always going to get disappointed. That's what you and I see when people come into therapy. It's not always the war traumas or the accidents or the severe child abuse. Obviously, those kind of things, they affect people, but most people have more minor ones, as you say, not life-threatening, but still very life-affecting. Sometimes, again, for their whole lives, if they never resolve it and they never move beyond it.
So in your opinion, how does trauma affect one person who stays into trauma for many, many years, and what changes or what happens in another person where they become more resilient and they shifted from the tragedy and keeping it no matter what to a shift and either moving on the same, or even what happens where they excel from it or thrive from it?
Yeah, well, and those are the two things that I think are most interesting. We already know, and we've learned a lot in recent years about post-traumatic stress. In early years, in the early 1900s, we barely knew about this post-traumatic stress. So the good news is we're much more aware. The bad news is we tend to overgeneralize that everybody has post-traumatic stress, or that they can't heal, as I said, or that there's no such thing as post-traumatic growth or post-traumatic success. So based on the research and what I've learned in my psychotherapy, my clinical work, I think there are three things that make the difference between whether you develop post-traumatic stress or you develop post-traumatic success. And the first one is, when you go through a tragedy or trauma or something that deeply affects you in a harsh way, in a negative way, can you more deeply connect in three areas, or do you disconnect? So if you connect in these three areas, you're more likely to move on from the trauma or develop positive things in your life after the trauma or after the tragedy. And three areas of connection. One is you connect more deeply to yourself as a result of this terrible thing. Second thing is you connect more deeply to someone else as a result of this terrible thing. You learn to trust people. You move closer to people. I've talked to people who went through severe heart attacks, and they said, I was kind of, took everybody for granted in my life. Now I don't take anybody for granted. I treasure my friends. I treasure my kids. I treasure my spouse in a way that I never really appreciated before, because I almost lost them. And so that's some deeper connection that they developed as a result of this tragedy. And then the third area of connection to something beyond, which most people call spirituality or religion, but it could be just a bigger meaning or purpose. You come out of this terrible experience and you say, gee, I've been messing around in my life so far. I think I have a bigger mission, and I better start working on that. But for most people, it connects them more deeply to God, to spirituality, to a sense of bigger purpose and meaning. And if you can do those three connections post-traumatically, you're much more likely to move on, heal, even develop a better life. If instead you disconnect from yourself, I mean, you as a therapist know this, we call this dissociation. Sometimes people feel things, they don't even know they feel it. Sometimes things are happening in their body, they don't even know things are happening in their body. They've disconnected. That's called dissociation in the technical term. Or they pull away from other people, or they push other people away in the wake of trauma or tragedy. Or they say, oh, God hates me, God's let me down, God's, forgotten me, or there's no meaning to life. They just lose the bigger sense of connection to meaning and purpose beyond oneself. And if that happens, they're very likely to develop post-traumatic stress.
So when we
or stay stuck in it.
So when we talk about connection to self, let's take each one of them. When we talk about connection to self, as you said many times when people go through a trauma, they go through some level of powerlessness. In essence of being, in a traumatic experience is that the illusion that we were in control kind of just wipes away. And we kind of, it shatters, and we face this concept of, oh crap, there's no way at that moment everything could have been lost. I even got that experience once when I had a really bad backache, and for the first time in my life, I couldn't get up. Like this concept of mind over matter, didn't matter how much my mind said anything to my back, my muscles were not moving. And for the first time, I'm like, is this real? Like this type of a powerlessness that I could experience was profound, and it wasn't anything traumatic that was happening to me. But I know that when something happens that is beyond our control, and then something is happening by another human being, let's say, then it takes other meanings. Like we add different kind of meanings to it. And then the way we are with each other, as you said, this connection that happens with us. I've seen people who go through the experience of being nicer to themselves and having more compassionate to themselves. And then I've seen on the other side, people who really start beating themselves down and, how bad they were and how clumsy they are or how weak they are. And they go through this whole ordeal of really badgering and battering themselves, or it's a epiphany moment of being nice to themselves. And depending, I guess, on how they were raised or what the kind of the dialogue and the voice was in their head and in their system, you see that piece, functioning in a hyper level. So what would be your suggestion in the area of connecting self that our audience could take that on and utilize it?
Well, I think that there are, you mentioned here what I think is the second component of post-traumatic growth and post-traumatic success, and that is compassion. It's softening towards yourself or others, so there's self-compassion, as you were talking about. Instead of being harsh to yourself and unkind and critical, super critical of yourself, judging yourself harshly, you soften and accept yourself and your flaws and imperfections and the fact that sometimes you're not in control, that you can't control everything. So you kind of develop a kindness towards yourself as well as a kindness towards other people. That some people who go through trauma or difficult experiences, they start to develop more empathy for other people instead of, why can't that person get it together? Why is that person doing that? You think, they're probably going through a hard time. You develop a little more compassion. So for me, the first C is the first component of post-traumatic success. The first C, I call it, is connection, and the second one is compassion. But there are other ways to connect to yourself, I think. One is, this has been worked out over century after century. Some people meditate, some people read the Bible, some people read the Quran, some people pray. There are ways to get connected to yourself intuitively, your inner self. Just going for a walk by yourself, going for a walk out in nature by yourself. There are rituals that you can develop to connect to yourself. And some people get so busy, they don't know what's going on with themselves. They try and they are distracted by, raising kids, getting to the job, doing all the errands you have to do in life. And what I'm suggesting is that one way to reconnect to yourself is to develop rituals of connection with yourself. Daily rituals, weekly rituals, monthly rituals, So that's one way to connect. The other way is connect to the body, because often in trauma, people get disconnected. Somehow they get disconnected from their bodies. They learn it's so painful to be there because I was so overwhelmed either with emotions or with the physical sensations. So just connecting back, I think, would be a good thing. Rituals to connect, getting massages, exercising, taking walks again, finding yourself in your body, mindfulness, which is a big thing, meditation, where you just notice what's happening without judging or without trying to change it. All those are good things, I think, to reconnect with yourself.
When you experience with your clients, when they reconnect, especially people who've been traumatized, it's almost like I keep hearing the minute they reconnect with their body, what they also experience is heightened level of anxiety, because at one point it's almost, especially if traumas have happened by natural causes or issues and things that have happened from other side of the world, from others. For example, because we're talking to the Persian community, obviously there was a war. There were a lot of ups and downs with the government that people had to go through. They've gone through many, many years of different governments, which they've always been afraid of what's going to happen, if they are not doing what they're supposed to be doing out there. Then it's, the trauma of feeling, kind of upset about others and their neighbors, and if they're going to give them out and talk about them and then be a cause of them getting into trouble. So somehow it just seems like we become scared of the world, and the fear sets in. It's as if we're never safe. It's like the illusion of safety also gets ripped away. So for the people who go through something like that, if they're going to connect to themselves, it seems like anxiety gets heightened. And sometimes that's why they just jump out, because it's easier to focus on other things than yourself and not deal with that anxiety. What would be your suggestions to those people in how to connect themselves and kind of either soothe the anxiety or bypass the anxiety?
Right. Well, I think the first thing is just to validate that anxiety is real, and it's based on something real. It's not totally imagined. There are real things out there, so you just validate it, accept yourself for having it, rather than, oh, why am I so afraid, and why am I not more courageous? To accept yourself first. The second thing is, again, I think that, that there are two levels of fear. You become afraid of being afraid. So if you can just sit with yourself with that anxiety without trying to fix it or change it, that's, and again, you and I both do clinical work, so we know that sometimes just sitting with someone when they're upset and not trying to fix it or change it becomes a really powerful healing, because all of a sudden they're not trying to get away from it. We're not judging it and saying it's bad. We're not saying you have to get rid of it. First we sit with it, and then maybe we work on changing it. So I think that's the first thing, is just to sit with it, not trying to fix it and change it. Second thing is not get down on yourself for feeling it. Third thing is to validate it, that there really is some reality to this anxiety. Maybe you've distorted it or exaggerated a little because you become afraid of being afraid.
Now, when it comes to trauma and the connection with others, I've really noticed when it's natural disaster trauma, or even when it was 911 or 9/11 or any of those things that happen, it seems like you get a group of people who really, really can connect with each other and ask for help and feel that they're all in the same boat. So this way of connecting with others and experiencing the same trauma sometimes gives us not the essence of the powerlessness, but the essence of the unity and the connectedness, that we're together. We have a bigger force. We could do something for each other. And then there's also the other part, which, for example, a trauma that happens with an accident, and the person is so afraid to go back because others are also on the street and they were the cause of this happened. Or, for example, if something happened to them where they were tortured or beat up or robbed, or abused, sexually abused, raped,
right.
It appears that there's another level of distrust with others. And so this is like the two sides of it. So what do you suggest about connecting with others?
I think it is harder when you go through something on your own rather than when you go through this community. I visited New York after those 9/11 attacks, and I visited in New York before. people weren't very nice in New York. I hate to say, it's a big city, typical. They wouldn't make eye contact with you, wouldn't say hello. I went there about 4 months after the 9/11 attacks. People were friendly. People were kind to one another. People, if you looked bad, if you looked upset, people would stop you on the street and say, "Are you okay?" That it went away after a couple of years, as it usually does in a big city. But I think you're right. That group, people develop less stress, less post-traumatic stress when they go through something together. I know from Moran, when everyone in the society is going through it, they empathize with one another, and sometimes there's a level of support. When you're secretly abused in your childhood, sexually abused by one of your parents or by a family member or by somebody else, and you don't feel you can share it with anybody, that keeps, I think, the thing it's a lot harder for you to trust people, as you say, connect with people, and you feel ashamed that you keep people at a distance. You either push them away or you pull away, and that, according to the research and according to this thing that I'm talking about, if you disconnect, it's a bad idea. So just telling your story sometimes to someone who is sympathetic and won't judge you, that's why we have therapy in part, or maybe that's what you do in your religious context. You can talk to somebody that's safe, sometimes writing your story so you can connect yourself and at least you've said it once. That can be really powerful. But ultimately, reaching through that fear to reconnect with somebody else, I can tell you, based on the research and based on my clinical experience, that connecting with others who aren't judgmental and who won't keep abusing or hurting you, I think that's a really good thing, and it's a hard thing to do when you're so frightened, but it is the healing thing to do. We evolve in groups. We're not great when we get too isolated and too much on our own. Now, it's nice to have some time on your own, but if you're feeling alienated and isolated from people, it lends itself to post-traumatic stress rather than post-traumatic success.
Now, when you talk about connection to the bigger picture and to life as it is, it seems like, as you were saying, that people, when they go through a trauma experience, they go through this sort of a kind of, what's the point? Like they question the whole purpose of life, in a sense of, why am I here? Why am I working so hard? Why am I giving so much? Why? And there's a distinct difference of like over-analyzing their life and what's beyond. And some people actually, where they were religious and spiritual, because they didn't get it their way or they were traumatized and shocked, at one point let go of God and they get angry at God. And if God was amazing and great and so forgiving, why would they do this to me? Why would they give me the illness or somebody else the illness, or create such a traumatic event or take away my child or something? So they get away with it, and then the whole life becomes meaningless in a sense. And vice versa, the other side where you said of, if it's a trauma that they can share with others, somehow they recapture and think that, oh, I'm not just this isolated human being or species, that I'm part of and one of, and then, in that sort changes. What do you suggest about that type of a connection?
Well, I think you're right in that there's been a whole book written about trauma and suggesting that a lot of the post-traumatic effects, the bad things that happen to people in the wake of trauma, is the shattering of that meaning, the shattering of identity and the shattering of meaning. It's like, I thought I was this person or this kind of person, and I thought the world was like this, and now I'm not so sure. So maybe when we come back from the break, we can talk about how to find meaning in the wake of that bigger meaning in the wake of tragedy and trauma, because that's the third C that we really haven't gotten into yet.
Awesome. So be with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the second part of Inner Voice Show. I'm Foojan Zeine, and here today I'm with Bill O'Hanlon. He's an author and a psychotherapist, and we're talking about how to actually thrive after a trauma and a traumatic event rather than carry the trauma throughout your whole life. So Bill, you were talking about, first we were talking about connection, the connection to self and to others, and to kind of like the whole picture of the universe at large. So please continue.
Well, we were talking right before the break about people sometimes lose their sense of meaning and their trust in their identities and in the universe, and God and the spirituality, meaning of the universe. And so how do you recover that? So in the studies that they've done on post-traumatic, this literature is called post-traumatic growth, but I've just called it post-traumatic success, since I think it's not always growth, but it's thriving and recovering from trauma. So the third C that we haven't talked about too much is contribution. So it's spinning pain into purpose, I call this. And there's a couple of variations on it, but one, let me just tell you a story. I heard this story on American television. They had, an American family had been in Italy on a vacation, on a holiday. They'd taken their two kids, I think, who were 10 and 8 years old. And they were driving down a highway, and they didn't realize that in Italy, this highway was famous for having bandits that would pull your car over, force you off the road, and rob you. And so when a car started to try and push them off the road, they became frightened for their children. They told their children to lay down in the back seat, so they couldn't be seen, and they tried to drive away from these people. Well, the bandits, knowing, everyone was used to just pull over because they'll just rob you and then let you go on your way. The bandits pulled out a gun and shot it into the back seat to frighten the driver. They didn't know that the children were in the back seat, and they wounded the children. By the time they got to the hospital, the children had died shortly afterwards. And so this family, of course, they go to Italy for this holiday, and it hits the Italian media that what they did in the wake of that is they said, our kids have died. We can't make any sense of this. This is just crazy, random, we've lost our children. We should at least make something out of it. We'll donate their organs. And it turned out at the time, very few people in Italy donated organs. It was just not done culturally. And then this story hits the Italian news media and all the tabloids, and it's this American family, look what we do to them, and look how they respond. They do this kindness, and they save 5 children's lives because they donated their children's eyes and organs and other organs in some way. And it became a big movement in Italy to donate your organs in honor of these children. And they have them back there some years later, the parents, and they give them the Italian Medal of Honor or whatever, some great honor for all the people that they saved their lives indirectly because they started this movement. Maybe it was 100,000 people that they saved their lives with kidney transplants or heart transplants or eye transplants or whatever. They really improved the quality of Italian people's lives. And the parents said, look, nothing can bring our kids back. But now we know why they were here. They were angels who were sent here to try and help other people. And their lives had meaning and purpose. So in the wake of trauma, can you find a way to turn this pain into a contribution? So that's the third C, this contribution. Can you find a purpose beyond yourself or beyond the tragedy? Maybe, those of us who are therapists, often we went through difficult things when we were younger, and we turned that pain into a desire to help other people so that we could reduce suffering. So we could be treated maybe better than we were treated because people either ignored it, they weren't aware of it, or they responded to us poorly. So our lives became purposeful because we turned our tragedy or our pain into a profession where we can contribute to other people. So you don't always have to do it through your profession. You can do it through praying for people or contributing in other ways, volunteering or, making a donation or helping someone through random act of kindness, as they say, the term. Can you turn any time that you're starting to feel haunted by your trauma, can you turn towards somebody else? Again, even if it's only your mind and you pray for somebody else who's suffering like you suffered, that can start to change things into the post-traumatic success away from post-traumatic stress.
And as I was hearing you, it seems like we go then from an isolation place to the connectedness, to the oneness, and automatically with what you said, we go from the fear of others rather than being fearful of others. We choose a group of people where we can be one with them and no longer be afraid of them, or shift the sense of safety as if in one way the concept of safety was taken away. We're going to be proactive rather than staying a victim, being proactive and giving it back, or creating a structure or becoming part of the structure that gives back so that it creates the safety again within the world that we live in. Because it's really harsh when we isolate ourselves thinking that the world is a dangerous place. And within that, it just seems like we go in, not from a very positive place, but we kind of get destructive within ourselves. And that's why a lot of people also after trauma, they become addicted to many sorts of drugs or prescription drugs or alcohol or any type of other behaviors, like running away from themselves and then destroying themselves because it's as if there's no way of connecting to the outside world.
I think that's right. And, I was talking about this one time and I said, first, I think you need to figure out where you've been disconnected and see if you can reconnect. Second, you need to develop compassion for yourself and others. And then third, make a contribution. The person said, well, when you're connected with yourself and others and something beyond, and when you're compassionate towards yourself and other people, isn't the next thing that naturally occurs to you is you want to help others, you want to make a contribution? So I think these things are all connected in some way. The connection, compassion, and contribution lead to and feed into one another, and the disconnection and the harsh judgment towards yourself or other people, and the desire to protect yourself and keep what's yours, they're all part of that constellation of post-traumatic stress. So I think if and obviously most people have some combination of it. There's some places where they disconnect, and some places where they connect, some places where they're softened towards themselves or other people, some places where they're really judgmental or tough or harsh or mean-spirited. Some places where they want to give, and some places where they want to protect themselves and only keep it for themselves. So most people are a complicated combination of things. But I'm seeing if you can lean over in these directions of connecting deeply with yourself, others, and something beyond, compassion toward yourself and others, and making a contribution out in the world out of that pain, you're going to lean more towards healing rather than staying stuck.
Now, also, the concept of the seeing something possible beyond what happens. Many times people go through trauma, and as you said, the word stuck, they get stuck in that moment. They have no way of looking at the world will change, their life will change. There is going to be a life with another sort of a possibility, and since you're the possibility guru, the concept of the possibility beyond who they are and what they're actually looking at, and can it be that they're really creating those possibilities? So I'm intrigued. How come you came up with possibility theory?
Well, I studied with this very strange psychiatrist who was almost psychotically optimistic about people, Milton Erickson, and he believed everyone could change. And when I studied with him, I studied psychology at the same time, and I studied neurological psychology, brain psychology, and they told me when I studied that many years ago, I won't tell you how many years ago, it was many decades, that it will carbon date me, but they told me the brain doesn't change after an adolescence. It pretty much stays the same. Now, Milton Erickson, my psychiatrist mentor, didn't believe that. He believed people would change all through life. And those of us who are therapists, we better believe that, or we're going to just give up on our profession. And it turns out now, after 30 or 40 more years of research, neurologists and brain scientists are starting to realize people can change all through life. Their brains change and can learn all through life. That's the good news. That's called brain plasticity. The bad news is the brain doesn't change all through life unless you stretch it, unless you change your patterns, unless you challenge old patterns, because it's hard to, once your brain gets kind of grooved and once your habits get grooved, if you have a habit of withdrawing from people and not connecting with people, it takes some effort and some courage to break out of that groove and to do something different. So, you mentioned the book that got me on Oprah, which was called Do One Thing Different. I think one of the early things I realized as a therapist, there's a 12-step saying. If you keep doing the same thing you've always done, you'll keep getting the results you've always gotten. And insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. So if you want to change, if you've gone through something terrible, that's bad enough. But unless you want to suffer some of that again and again and again through the rest of your life, as I said, I had a client who was in her 80s. She was still suffering from something that happened when she was 7. Until you make a change, until you change the pattern, these patterns that don't work, the patterns that keep creating suffering, again and again. That moment when you were 7 years old or 12 years old or 25 years old is already gone, but you brought it with you in the habits, the internal habits and the social habits that you have and the environmental habits that you have. So change something do something different, I guess, is the key here.
Well, I've kind of followed you past 15 years in different lectures where I've gone to Ericksonian, master's level conferences. And one thing I need to say about you is you definitely change every some years. Every time I've come to lecture I've watched you talk about neurolinguistic, I've watched you talk about hypnosis, I've watched you from, one level to another. And one of my greatest joy is next 3 years when I come and see Bill, what is he going to be talking about? And it's always, you're a great speaker. And I know that you have your new passion is actually coaching people in how to be an amazing speaker and how to be a great writer. Again, it's like from one extreme to the other. And what happened there? It's just part of what you got excited about and wanted to share?
Well, because out of this contribution, and again, I don't want to get into my personal stuff so far, but it's too much. But I almost killed myself when I was younger because I was depressed. And there were some earlier traumas that sort of led into that. And I stuck around, and I had to find a meaning and a purpose for being here. And one of my meanings was to help other people. To help other people both with their suffering, and also help them realize what they were here for and what their contribution was. And I began to write books as part of that and become a speaker as part of that. And I was a shy person, so becoming a speaker was hard, and I wasn't a very good speaker either, which was a different thing. But anything you practice, I mean, when you first started doing the show, I'm sure it was pretty nerve-wracking and hard to do, and now it's like, yeah, I've done it a lot, and you get better at it. If you work at it, you get better at it. Well, that's happened for me with speaking, and it really happened to me with writing. I was not a writer. I did not want to write, but I wanted to communicate my message and contribute to other people, so I overcame my reluctance, my bad writing skills, my distractibility, I guess you might say, my unwillingness to write. I just thought, who cares what you feel like? Other people need this, so you better write a book. And so because I struggle with this so far, I meet people who are natural writers, it's easy for them, or natural speakers, and it's easy for them. It wasn't for me. I had to work at it. So once I figured it out, my next impulse is everyone who wants to write a book should know about this. I know how to do this. I really know how to do this. I figured it out. I figured out how to write a book, which was hard for me, and I figured out how to get it published. And I had a busy life with 4 kids and a busy practice and, other things in my life. And I was able to write 10 books in 10 years. So I figured this thing out, and, I share it with people. I told you, go get my free report at getyourbook.written.com and went and got it. And, you've already written a book, but I have a way of writing it more quickly, writing it more focused so that it's more likely to sell and it's easier for you to write. And then also how to get published, which is a different strategy or a different set of skills than writing. So I got really excited about coaching people to make whatever their contribution with writing or speaking or doing internet-based things or television or media-based things. I think we should get our message out to a wider group because self-help gurus are doing much better than psychotherapists in reaching people. People who write books reach many more people we can reach as therapists. And so I just wanted to reach everybody who is suffering or frustrated and needed to move on or make a contribution in their life. So I got excited about coaching beyond what I did as a therapist or even writing about psychotherapy. I wanted to write about other things to help people. So thank you for asking.
You have written 35 books, and the latest ones one is the Change Your Life book, which came out 2012, and then Becoming a Published Therapist, and then you also wrote a book about actually writing is a verb, so go ahead and do it. And then your new book that you're working on right now, which will be coming out in April 2014, is Out of the Blue. That's a great name. 6 non-medication ways to relieve depression, and that will be coming in 2014, right?
Well, the reason I wrote that, I'm not a medication basher, but medication doesn't do everything, and it doesn't work for some people. And I wanted to come up with what I found over the years really helped me because I was depressed when I was younger and I came out of it, and helped other people, either the people that I worked with or the people that I taught that worked with other people, really come out of that terrible, terrible depressive place. It turns out, according to statistics, about 10% of people at one point or another are going to get depressed, seriously depressed. Like your back pain immobilized you. This is sort of psychological, emotional immobilization. People get confined to their beds or just restricted in their lives, and they suffer so much. And there's some cool research, both on brain science and other research, on how people can start to move out of depression without or beyond taking medications. And I was so excited I want to share that, and that'll be coming out with Norton next year. I know you have a book with Norton, and so we share a publisher. Yeah.
Well, actually, I am so excited that you're going to take me on and teach me how to write much more efficiently. My promise to myself, to you, and the audience is by end of 2014. This is a declaration. By end of 2014, this book will be published and out about my psychotherapy method, which I'm really excited about. But I get stuck with writing. And, my first conversation is in Persian and then in English, and I think I'm really bad at writing on both. So, so you're going to help me go through and experience a whole different way of writing. For you guys, I really asked you to go to BillO'Hanlon.com and look at all the speaking engagements, all the books, 35 books, and audio. You have a lot of audios that people can download and get experience if you want to write a book, if you want to talk, and be a public speaker. I know that you don't do individual psychotherapy and coaching anymore, right?
Well, no, I really have focused on trying to make those bigger contributions. I had a practice for 30-some years, and I just got so busy, I didn't have time to take care of myself or for my loved ones. So I cut back on that, and I'm only doing writing, speaking, online, and coaching, group coaching. So, yeah, thank you. And, I also want to say this is my first opportunity to really speak to people. I know a lot of your audience is Iranian, and I just want to say hello and good to meet you, and I hope that someday I can meet you in person. But thank you for listening to me.
Well, it's been a joy having you. I really enjoyed your lectures when I was there. I thank you for giving me the time, and I hope that when your book comes out about depression, please come on the show again, because as we're talking about Persian, especially women, they have 6 times statistic of having depression than men, especially in the Persian population. So I would love to be able to speak with you when your book comes out.
Sure.
Thank you. I also, for our Armenian audience, I want to say Merry Christmas, because yes, Armenian.
Armenian. Hello to all the Armenians.
Yes, our Armenian, Persian, and all the Armenian in the world, they actually don't celebrate on the 25th of December. They celebrate on January 6th, which is today. Right. And I want to say Happy New Year to everyone, and look at the possibilities of all that can happen this year, and may you have everything you ever wished for and can put into action and create this year. Thank you, Bill, so much for being with us today.
Thank you, and happy possibilities to all.
Thank you. Take good care of everyone, and I'll be with you next week right here. Goodbye. Hello, I'm Dr. Foojan Zeine. I'm a psychotherapist, a licensed marriage and family therapist, speaker, and an author. I would like to tell you about a seminar, The Power of Two, that I'm doing with Behnam Bakhshande, which is a wonderful coach and a relationship and a business coach. This seminar is about you in your relationship, the most important aspect of your life, your intimate relationship. In this seminar, you will get how you have been behaving, how you have been thinking, your belief system, and your behaviors within your intimate relationship that has created the result that you have gotten right now. And will give you a lot of tools, amazing keys in how to create a successful relationship and how to sustain and maintain it. I hope you enjoy it.